Hello athletes, this is Travis coming back to you with some more training talk with a topic that is sure to rub a lot of people the wrong way, but you never move forward or make progress without pissing some people off, alright? So let's go ahead and dive in to the subject of the day, which is talking about why it is a bad idea to use test efforts to determine training pieces. All right, an example of what I'm talking about here is a lot of times coaches will have their athletes either do a 2,000 meter piece or a 5,000 or 6,000 meter piece, some kind of full effort time trial, and then they will extrapolate their training zones based on their performance on that trial. All right, and so they might have a steady state, and they say your steady state is your 2K plus 12 or something like that, or your transport is 2K plus 2 or 3 or whatever it may be, and there's a lot of reasons why that presents problems. All right, and we'll talk about kind of some of the most obvious first. Number one, not everybody has the physical and psychological ability to max out on a time trial. All right, I've coached literally well over 1,000 athletes over my time, and there is a very small percentage of those athletes that can sit down, and when you have them go at full max effort, that they can go at max effort. All right, looking back at my own career, having won several national championships, having won Canadian Henley, having been fairly successful at a pre-elite level of this sport, I can count on my hand how many races that I feel like I got a true maximal effort out. All right, the majority of people just don't have that mental capacity, and our sport is so fixated. It kind of has this fetish on mental toughness. And just like in a lot of things, the people that tend to kind of fixate on these things are generally people that don't display those things. All right, and so you'll get a lot of coaches that talk a lot about mental toughness who themselves were not very mentally tough athletes. All right, and I want to be able to talk about this in this video and not have it be have a negative connotation with this inability to kind of get a maximal performance out of yourself mentally. It is extraordinarily difficult. There's got to be a lot of pieces that are in place. The athletes that are at the top of their game in the sport, we like to assume that they're better at getting their maximal effort in on a race by race basis, and they probably are, but can they do that on demand every time? I'm sure they have times where they feel like they did not perform mentally to their capability. And so when you're asking the average population or the average athletic population to sit down and do a time trial, and you're extrapolating training zones based on the expectation that they're performing at their best, then that's going to create problems. All right, and it's going to create problems just on the kind of if you take a one-off person and put them in that erg test, but it's going to create additional problems if you are doing that to a range of people. All right, because there's also a range of abilities to get the most out of your body, in a race situation or a maximal effort situation. All right, so if I'm coaching for myself, a team of youth athletes, for one, those youth athletes are there for a ton of different reasons, all right? Some are there, yes, because they're highly competitive athletes that want to work hard and want to get their best performance. There's athletes that are there because they want to be healthy and they like the activity, but that's not, performance isn't their primary motivation, and they're just not, they don't have that ability to kind of get to that 100%. There's people there that are there recreationally. They're going to be doing it because they prefer the social connection, they prefer, they like having an active lifestyle, but their life isn't centered around that activity. And so if you take that range of people and you give them a maximal effort piece, then they're going to probably perform anywhere from let's say 70-75% of their true ability up to about 95% of their true ability. All right, and so if you take all those people and you take an athlete that is more recreationally minded and you take an athlete that is, hardcore competitive, and you give them that time trial, and then you're setting all their training zones based on that time trial, then guess what? Your athlete that is got 70-75% out of their max effort is going to be having a far less effective training program, or I won't say less effective, because who knows, that slower times may be more effective for them, but they're going to have a very different training zone relative to the max than the athlete that went 100% or went 95%. All right, I try not to say 100% because I think 100% is a rare achievement. There's not too many athletes that go out and they say, I could not have done a single thing better in that piece. All right, so let's say 95%, is the highest reasonable. So you're creating that. And so let's say you have one athlete, all right, you do a 2,000 meter piece, X athlete gets a 2-minute split in the average. And let's say that they really could have gone a 157, all right, if they had the mentality of, an Olympic or elite athlete. And another athlete, that does go, 157, because they are able to get to that amount, or they're able to push themselves to their max a lot more effectively and not more in a much more repeatable manner. And so if you say, well, these people, their 2K are their steady state, their UT2 is 2K plus 12, all right, then that one athlete is going to be at the 209 and one athlete is going to be at that 212. But we're saying these athletes have the same physical ability, they just have the different mental ability to kind of get to their max. Well, then assuming that your plus 12 is right, and I'm just using that a completely arbitrary number, please don't assume that you should be doing steady state at 2K plus 12, and we'll go into why later. That one of those athletes is theoretically going to be training in their UT2 and one athlete isn't. All right, so you're either going to have one athlete that's training too hard, or you're going to have one athlete that's training too easy, assuming that either one of those is going to be right in the first place. All right, and then you say, well, that athlete, they're not as mentally tough. Maybe they can't handle that steady state. Well, that's also completely false, because there could be athletes that have no problem rowing at, whatever percent of their max steady state is in terms of effort, but as they get closer to effort, they have a harder and harder time mentally motivating themselves to kind of push at that place, then they're going to have no problem doing the intensity that they should be doing for steady state. Theoretically, let's say they should both be doing 209. Well, the athlete that might not be able to push to 100% on their max effort on their time trial may have absolutely no problem pulling a 209, for their steady states, all right? So, that's a problem, all right? And so you're assuming that the athletes are mentally able to produce a reliable measure of their maximal performance. 2, it's extraordinarily naive to think that you have a formula calculation that's going to determine, how far somebody's UT2 is from a testing pace, or any training pace, UT1, AT, transport, from their testing pace. All right, the human body and the population of humans simply aren't that predictable. All right, and that's why I talk a lot in my videos, especially about the more common training zones, the UT2, the UT1, about how they should feel and how you should approach it, and ultimately that feeling and developing an understanding of what your aerobic training should feel like at its different levels is paramount to you getting the most out of that aerobic training. All right, you can't just use a formula. All right, you got to trust your instincts. All right, and if you're going about your training properly and you have a coach that's guiding you well, then they're not going to give you UT2 sessions that you could regularly complete at a UT1 pace or an AT pace. All right, and so the structure of the session itself is designed around the energy zone that you should be training it within. And so, you shouldn't be able, if you have a whole training program, you shouldn't be able to do all your UT2 training at a UT1 pace or an AT pace. If you did, there should be some failure happening there, all right? You're going to be overtrained, you're going to be too tired, you're not going to be recovering between sessions. If you're training at the paces that you should, then you're going to be able to execute the training program as it's prescribed. All right. And now we're going to go into another reason why kind of these max effort training pieces are a really bad idea for setting your speed on your other ones. And that goes to a physiological range of how athletes produce speed. All right. And for me, you have two ends of the spectrum. All right. And everybody is on a spectrum. All right. And one end of that spectrum I call the users. And at the other end of the spectrum, I call the transporters, all right? And these terms I've seen used in other places in the sport, but they don't get talked a lot about. And if you Google it, there's just so many other uses of each of those terms that it's hard to kind of track down exactly what we're talking about. But we have a spectrum, all right? We'll call it a genetic spectrum of users and transporters. Users are athletes that are genetically or through their history of training, they're exceptionally good at using oxygen or metabolizing oxygen, their aerobic ability to produce energy, all right? They're good at using oxygen. At the other end of the spectrum, you have your transporters, all right? Transporters have an exceptionally strong and efficient heart, all right? Their transport pump, all right? Their heart. And most people are going to fall within a range of that, all right? You know, you're going to get people who are equally good at using oxygen versus transporting oxygen relative to their peers, and you're going to have people at the ends of the spectrum. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens at the end of the spectrum. And I can think of two athletes in my coaching career that are wonderful examples of this. Of one that was just an exceptional athlete at using oxygen, all right? Their aerobic performance was very, very high, all right, certainly relative to their peers. You know, and then certainly that translated into a good testing performances, all right? And so this athlete's, you know, aerobic, you know, steady state, you know, mid 150s, their 2K times 615-ish, all right? So that athlete, you know, and their training times as well were also very fast, all right? But when this athlete went to a max effort test, the gap between their anaerobic training, particularly their transport, and their full effort racing pace was fairly small, all right? It's fairly small because they got those good training times because they were really good at using oxygen. But when you ask an athlete to shift into max, you're really asking them to get the most out of that transport capacity, all right? And it's the only time you're really asking them to do that. Well, because their skill came from using the oxygen from their aerobic abilities and not from the transport, there was a very small gap between their training paces and their racing paces. And go back to this other athlete I'm thinking about who was exceptionally good at, who just had a really, really strong heart. Her training paces were always significantly slower than her teammates, all right? But when it came time to do a test, to do maximal effort, all of a sudden she was right up there at the top or near the top of her peers, all right? And so, and initially, you know, when I was a younger coach dealing with, you know, this former athlete, I was just like, this athlete just is not working as hard on their training. And it was only after, you know, further exposure to this athlete and understanding her capacity and understanding and appreciating the fact that she was working at the level that I wanted her to work, that her body simply wasn't producing typical speeds at the training paces relative to her 2,000 meter time, relative to her performance on the water, that I understood that it was simply a physiological characteristic of this athlete that when she was asked to go to 100% because she had an exceptionally strong and efficient heart, that she was just able to get more out of her body than she was, you know, at training paces where you're not asking a lot from that transport capacity. You're not putting a lot of demands on that system. And so if you take this idea then that you have people at this range of being exceptionally good users and exceptionally good transporters, and then you plug them into this system where you say, well, do this 2K test and then we're going to extrapolate from it. Well, what you're going to get is those transporters are going to chronically be training too hard, all right, because you're pulling them too close to their 2,000 meter performance. They should be farther away from their performance because their 2K performance is representing the strength of that transport capacity, and their training ability is not going to take advantage of that ability. Correspondingly then, if you take your users and you extrapolate, you know, you have your genetically exceptional users and you give them that training pace, then they're not going to be working hard enough, all right, because their ability to use oxygen is exceptional, and so their training paces are going to be a lot closer to their testing pace than the general population. All right, and the reason that that coaches get away with this erroneous assumption, this erroneous system of kind of just taking a training pace and very simply saying this is what everything should be, is because we still work in a range of average, all right? And we have a bell curve, all right? And so let's flip our users and transporters to the side, all right? And you're gonna have your bell curve of the population, all right? Of users and transporters. And the vast majority of people are gonna be right in the middle, all right? Right in the middle where, if you're lucky, your little, easy formula is going to apply, all right? But the farther you get along that bell curve to either side, the less your simplistic formula is going to serve your athletes effectively, all right? And these are all reasons why you need, either as an athlete or as a coach, to get away from this idea of just setting your training zones based on these testing paces, all right? What you need to do is you need to understand what UT2 feels like, for the body, how to set up a UT2 session. You need to understand what UT1 feels like, what's happening with your body, how you recover from it, how you approach it, what your training session, how it should be set up to appropriately train UT1. And if you have an athlete that understands what it should feel like, and you're giving them a training session that is designed for that energy zone and designed for that individual athlete's capacity, then you're going to get an effective training of each of those zones. Similarly, when you move to the anaerobic zones, your AT, your transport, your lactate tolerance, your lactate production removal, all these sessions, they have a certain feeling of sustainability for a given amount of time, all right? Your AT pace is generally going to be, whatever your 30-minute maximal effort is going to be. Your transport pace is generally going to be whatever your maximal effort is, somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. But in each of those, you're generally going to split it up to intervals. But there is a feeling associated with it, a feeling of sustainability that is going to kind of, adjust based on individual athletes, conditioning, their fitness, where they are within their training cycle. And if you're setting up those training sessions appropriately, whether it's transport, whether it's AT, whether it's UT1, whether it's UT2, then if they do it right, they're going to be able to complete the session. They're going to be able to complete the session with a very specific feeling. And if you set up the session wrong, then they're going to fail, or they're going to finish that session not feeling the way they should be feeling, all right? And that's where it is important to talk with a veteran coach, all right? And be careful with that, because there's a lot of coaches out there that are not particularly good at training methodology. You got to find the ones that are good at that, and then consult with them and use them to help you understand how to execute your training properly, all right? And I don't say that to disparage the coaches out there, and I've talked about this in one of my other videos, but successful coaches have to have a balance of a lot of different skills, all right? Management, communication, recruitment, marketing, technical coaching, understanding of physiology, all right? And so it's a blend of all those things. And some coaches are going to be really good at some of those, and some coaches are going to be not good at other one of those. And some are just going to be about average on everything. But because they're average on everything across the board, they can be an exceptional coach. And unfortunately, most coaches don't have the humility to kind of to recognize and to accept where in those spectrum and those skills that they are good and when they are not good, and bringing other people, whether it's assistant coaches or other people on the staff, to complement their weaknesses, and similarly to complement the weaknesses of their peers, all right? And so because of that lack of humility, a lot of athletes don't get serviced properly from their coaches, because their coaches are trying to do things, and trying to help those athletes in areas that they're not particularly good at, all right? And training methodology and understanding training and physiology and structuring training plans and individual workouts and teaching people how to understand their body is one of those things that the majority of coaches aren't particularly good at. But that's what I'm trying to do with these videos, is to try to help give information, because it is something that I understand well, to try to give you as athletes the information you need to get the most out of your time and your training. And hopefully, if other coaches out there have the humility to listen, whether they agree with me or not, to listen, to understand, and at least get them thinking about their own understanding, their own paradigm of training, and help evolve that and move that forward. But that's it. So that is the end of my talk. And so yeah, if you're looking at training programs and they're trying to make things too simplistic, they're trying to just kind of plug things into a formula and say, you know, based on this, you should be doing this. Based on that, you should be doing that. Approach that with extreme caution. All right. And for me, you know, for my own plug, you know, I'm more than happy to kind of work with athletes through GTS Rowing. That's gtsrowing.com. Either consult with you to help you kind of get better direction on your training, or work with you, you know, on a daily or weekly basis through the remote coaching. Please reach out. I'm more than happy to work with any athlete that's willing to kind of go to that next level with their training and be responsible for it, and not just kind of, you know, follow some Excel spreadsheet that somebody made, you know, a decade or two ago. All right, but that's it. This is Travis signing off. Thank you very much. Please share this if you feel like it will help somebody else that you know within the athletic or rowing community, and put a comment down below for sure if you have questions, or if you disagree. You know, and if you disagree, that's fine. Put it down below and share a well thought out, you know, well supported counter argument for what you think. All right, and contribute to this discussion. All right, so that's it. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you on the next video. Bye.